Hi class, in our previous recording we talked about some of the genetic factors that can determine your biological sex, whether you have the male phenotype or the female phenotype expressed, or some of the exceptions to the stereotypical or general XXXY genetic determination. In this recording we're going to focus on some of the hormonal determinants. So we're working under the assumption that if you have inherited the male genotype, you're going to have male hormones expressed in utero, and then if you have inherited the female genotype, you are going to have female hormones expressed in utero. Although it's worth mentioning that someone can inherit the female genotype and in utero be artificially exposed to male hormones and develop a male phenotype. We don't have time to dive into that though in this recording. So as we look at the developmental process. In utero, we have a fetus, and that fetus is going to be sexually undifferentiated. When we first start out in utero, we're all kind of the same looking. It's really, really hard to tell the difference between males and females, anatomically speaking. At about 5 to 6 weeks post-conception, so to give you a frame of reference, this is about 1 to 2 weeks, this is about 3 to 4 weeks after the woman has missed her period, we are going to have gonadal ridges starting to develop. So the woman is, at this point, she's just starting to wonder, hey, am I pregnant? Am I actually pregnant? I might actually be pregnant. Right about at that time, when she's having that late period, that's when these gonadal ridges start to develop. And we find that there are 2 sets of ducts adjacent to each gonadal ridge. Within males, we have the mesonephric ducts that ultimately are going to turn into the reproductive tract, and the paramesonephric ducts that are going to degenerate. In females, it's the paramesonephric duct that develops into the reproductive tract, and the mesonephric degenerates. So males develop the mesonephric ducts, females develop the paramesonephric ducts. And let's look at a picture just to make this a little bit clearer. So let me move this for us over here. We have the paramesonephric duct in purple, shown here in purple, formerly known as the Mullerian duct. I'm a little bit older and crustier, so that's the term I had to learn back in the day, was the Mullerian duct. And then we also have the mesonephric duct shown in teal. And for males, the mesonephric duct develops into the male reproductive tract. In females, this purple paramesonephric duct develops into the female reproductive tract. Now in males, the male that has inherited the male genotype will have the SRY region present. And that SRY region is going to code for a protein known as TDF, testes determining factor. And if TDF is expressed, that's going to initiate the development of testes from the ambiguous gonads. And those testes then start to secrete testosterone at 8 to 9 weeks post-conception. And 8 to 9 weeks post-conception, that testosterone from the testes is going to stimulate the development of mesonephric ducts into the male reproductive tract. At the very same time that the mesonephric duct is developing to the male reproductive tract, the testes are secreting another chemical known as the Mullerian inhibiting factor. And Mullerian inhibiting factor, if we're going to be really current with our names, instead of referring to it as Mullerian inhibiting factor, if we're going to update the name of the Mullerian duct to the paramesonephric duct, we might want to call it the paramesonephric inhibiting factor. But that term hasn't been updated quite yet. So we're still going to refer to it as the Mullerian inhibiting factor. It's a chemical that's going to cause the degradation of the Mullerian duct or the paramesonephric duct that would typically have developed into the female reproductive tract. Now, as we look at the effect of estrogen, a lot of people think that estrogen causes females to develop as females in utero, and that's not the case. It's the testosterone and the Mullerian inhibiting factor that are the key components. As we look at estrogen, all children, all fetuses, whether male or female or something in between, are going to be exposed to a lot of estrogen in utero because mom is pumping out tons of estrogen during the pregnancy process. And because we don't have all fetuses being feminized by mom's estrogen, we know that estrogen doesn't actually cause the development of the female processes. We have female development when there's an absence of androgen hormones, or in the case of androgen insensitivity, the inability to respond to the androgen hormones. So females develop not because of estrogen, but because of a lack of testosterone and a lack of Mullerian inhibiting factor. Or another way to think about it is we're all female by default, and we only turn into that male, we only develop the male phenotype when exposed to the testosterone and Mullerian inhibiting factor. So as we look at the female end of the spectrum, just to review, for the first trimester, really, for the first 8 to 10 weeks, so for most of the first trimester, anatomically, you can't tell the difference between male and females. However, later on in that first trimester, starting at about 8 to 9 weeks, we find that the female's reproductive tract begins to develop from the paramesonephric ducts, the Mullerian ducts. So in the absence of testosterone and in the absence of Mullerian inhibiting factor, the Mullerian ducts are going to further develop into a female reproductive tract. So it's not because of a positive action of any one hormone. Just to emphasize this again, it's due to the absence of those male hormones that come from the testes that a female will continue to develop down the female phenotypic pathways. As we look at those external genitalia, not the internal, but the external genitalia, they are going to all start out ambiguous early on. So 6 weeks post-conception, we have a genital tubercle. To me, I think of potatoes. Potatoes are tubers, and the genital tubercle looks like a potato to me. And then we have a urogenital fold and a labioscrotal fold. That genital tubercle is going to become the head of the penis or the clitoris. So depending on male or female phenotypes, it's going to be the head, glans penis, or the glans clitoris. It's the most sensitive part on the male or female anatomy, respectively. When we look at urogenital folds, this is a great name. The urogenital folds within the male developmental pathway is going to enclose the urethra, hence the term uro. And within the female developmental pathway, the urogenital fold is going to form the labia minora, part of the external genitalia. So urogenital for urethra and genitals, for the male urethra or the female's labia minora. And then we have labioscrotal folds. And again, a great name. It's either going to become the labia majora in the female developmental pathway or the scrotum in the male developmental pathway. So those are great names because they tell what they turn into in either the male or female phenotype when you look at those words. After the first trimester, so by week 12 post-conception, we are able to very clearly see the male and female genitalia. I'm thinking of my first child. He was a bit of a surprise for my wife and I when we found out that we were going to be having him. So we didn't get that initial ultrasound done to determine the gender until fairly late on. So I want to say it was like 18 weeks on, something of that nature. So instead of having just the normal, typical visible genitalia, for our oldest son, he had a very well-developed penis. And I remember very specifically that it was alarmingly large. It was about the size of his leg at about 18 weeks of development post-conception. So while these external genitalia are very visible at 12 weeks, the differences are going to be exaggerated as we go farther and farther on throughout the pregnancy. I remember talking to the ultrasound technician, and she told me the analogies that she uses. For the male genitalia, she looks for a turtle sticking its head out of its shell. And if she can see a turtle sticking its head out of its shell, that represents the scrotum and the head of the penis. And for the female genitalia, she looks, most ultrasound technicians are taught to look for 3 white lines stacked on top of each other. The two lateral ones represent the labia majora. The inner line represents the labia minora pressed directly against each other. And those three white lines, those three parallel white lines, are called the hamburger, or at least that's how my wife's ultrasound technician was taught what to look for. So at week 12, if you go in for that ultrasound, the technician may be looking for a turtle with its head sticking out or a hamburger while trying to identify those external genitalia. As we look at those organs, that male or female organs that are going to develop from the same embryonic structures, they're going to be homologous. In other words, they're going to serve a similar function to each other, physiologically speaking. So as we look at the penis is going to be very homologous to the clitoris because they come from the same pre-embryonic or the same embryonic structures, and they have a lot of the same functions, particularly that they're going to both be involved with sexual stimulation and pleasure. And when we look at the scrotum and the labia majora, they're very homologous to each other. They both have a stratified squamous epithelium that's keratinized, and they both have a lot of pubic hair present on them. And that's all we have for this recording on how we have differentiation of the two biological sexes based off of hormones in utero. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.